Hey, Patrick.
Hey, Michael J.
Oh man, there's just so much Dominaria, and so much of it's good. That's the other thing. So much of it's worth talking about.
Yeah, a lot of sweet stuff. Particularly, I mean, there's a disproportionate number of rares and mythics spoiled, so I think that contributes to some of the effect. But it's also not a given, right? Like a lot of sets, and in fact, it's not just that a lot of sets don't hit anywhere close to this. This actively looks great. Like, I am really excited about this set.
Even the cards that aren't, like, that don't jump off the page as being great are at least interesting, right? Like, I'd still talk about this. I'm like, oh, maybe I could find a spot for this. You know, there's a couple of cards I'm thinking of that you're just like, oh, you know, that's not so aggressively costed, but it certainly does a bunch of interesting stuff, you know?
Mm-hmm. Like, for instance, what do you think of Danitha Capashen, Paragon?
We are... Oh, sorry. Yeah.
No. I'm guessing you're on the same page, right?
On the same page. Literally the same page.
Yeah. This is the new one that's 2 and a white for a 2/2 legendary human knight. So 2/2 first strike, vigilance, lifelink, and then aura and equipment spells cost you 1 less to cast.
So on a baseline, Danitha Capashen Paragon, 2 and a white for a 2/2, just on, you know, casting cost versus body. Them's some Grey Ogre stats, right? That's not the most...
Pearl Unicorn, if you will.
Sure. Scathe Zombies, however you want to slice this one, right? So that's not exciting. But Danitha has so many abilities, right? So, all right, so nobody's going to play a 2/2 for 3 mana with no abilities, right, in competitive constructed. But you add First Strike and Lifelink.
Well, if you just start with lifelink, there's a precedent already, right? Like, we've seen 2-cost 2/2 lifelink show up, right? Like, that's been fringe.
Yeah. I mean, there's like 3 casting cost green creatures that have an expectation of gaining like around 2 to 4 life that people play out of their sideboards in some decks. Like, you know, nobody's so excited about some of those cards. I mean, like, not Kitchen Finks, right? But some of the other ones you'd see play. So it's not that far off. But this is actually a decent combat creature because of First Strike and Vigilance. But then you add on aura and equipment spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. Like, Danitha costs a little more than you want to be spending for a 2/2 creature, but she just pays you back with like, your first aura or equipment. And if you have like multiple auras or equipment, she pays you back a lot.
Yeah, and it's not actually clear you need to be saving the mana to even have her be worthwhile, because a 2/2 first strike vigilance lifelink for 3, like, if all you were getting is legendary synergies, like, let's suppose that your deck just had a few historic cards, or legendary. Let's suppose your deck just had a few legendary spells where you just need a critical mass of legends. You know, she's, like, completely viable. Even, I think she's going to show up sometimes with no auras or equipment. Unless they just print some sick aura or equipment in the set that, like, that you're just priced into always playing.
Yeah.
But, like, in general, I think that, like, I don't think she's that great, but I also think that the aura equipment part of her isn't, like, crucial to her kit.
Well, I was thinking 2 things about Danitha. One,
it's the most abusable part, but it's not crucial.
Yeah, like, she has like some white knight going on with her. Like, how many abilities can you cram onto a tiny creature and it's just good? You know, like, and these are pretty relevant abilities, especially lifelink, I think. Especially if you position her, you know, in some certain spot. Like, maybe she's not a great main deck aggro card, but maybe she's a good, you know, sideboard defender against certain colors, something like that. Like, she certainly beats up against small red creatures in combat, right? If she doesn't get shocked, she's gonna do some damage. She's gonna gain some life while doing that damage. But there are other things, like, what if you had like 1 casting cost equipment, for example, right? So it becomes 0 casting cost equipment. That suddenly starts getting kind of interesting, I think.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you could just play Skull Clamp for 0, that's, like, starting to get a little powerful. So we do have a comparison in Standard. Her closest comparison, I think, is Aerial Responder, which has been a fairly fringe but non-zero card at times. the difference here, she has first strike instead of flying, and then human knight, a legendary human knight at that, instead of dwarf soldier. And then instead of, slightly easier cost, but only a 2/2. So I think that, like, if you're not taking advantage of at least either, like, I think 2/2 first strike vigilance lifelink is on the merits worse than 2/3 flying vigilance lifelink more times than not. And, like, I think that her being a legend versus her being slightly easier to cast, more or less comes out in the wash. But I think that, like, if you're not taking advantage of either, one, her being a legend, or two, this cost reduction ability, then I would give a slight nod to Aerial Responder.
Yeah, Aerial Responder is a pretty cool card. I've always been kind of surprised it wasn't a little bit more...
it's just too many threes.
Yeah, I mean, Vigilance is just a huge downgrade relative to Death Touch, I think, right? Like, when we saw this model before with Vampire Nighthawk, like, Vampire Nighthawk was just, so potent for what you wanted it to do. Like, it wasn't the best card there was, but it was the best card for what you wanted to do with it. But I guess this is a great defense.
No, they're pretty comparable. I think they're going to be pretty close. I just think that there's so many good threes, whereas Vampire Nighthawk wasn't always up against competition.
All right.
But I don't know. Like, either way, I think Danitha is definitely one to consider as a fringe role player if you just need the legend. But in general, the cost reduction ability is the most exciting part. But even this one, where she's, like, her big claim to fame is that she's an uncommon legend, which is definitely uncommon, if you know what I mean. And in a similar vein, but almost the opposite side, Cast Down, I think, is one of the most important uncommons that we've seen so far, which is 1 and a black instant, destroy target non-legendary creature.
Wow, so this card doesn't have any targeting restrictions around artifacts or colorless or
multicolored.
Black. Yeah, so this is going to be, I think, a pretty popular card. I mean, it would be an odd universe where there were so many legends that Cast Down wasn't good enough. I think this card is probably going to be a relatively popular main decks in black control decks, and probably go up to 4 of in some decks after sideboarding. Seems like very versatile and fast and kind of all the things you'd want out of a 2 casting cost point removal spell.
Yeah, I mean, this seems like it makes a lot more sense than the old Kamigawa one that was destroy target legendary creature.
Hero's Demise.
Yeah. But, like, I think Cast Down is going to have some really good effects on the metagame in terms of being able to taking some of the teeth out of, like, some of these fast aggro decks while adding a little bit of extra incentive for some of these legends. I think that's just so smart. And I think I also think that this cheap removal, like we saw last week, the white removal spell, Seal Away.
Yeah, I love it.
And then now we're seeing Cast Down, and with Cast Down and Seal Away having such an effect on cheap removal, and then obviously Blue has Wizard's Retort of sorts, not to mention the Into the Royal reprint, which I suppose we should touch on. Blink of an Eye.
Yeah. This card is exactly Into the Royal, right? So it's 1 and a blue for return target non-land permanent to its owner's hand. If this spell was kicked, draw a card, and its kicker is 1 and a blue. Just Into the Royal. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you were the biggest Into the Royal fan, but I was. I think.
Oh, definitely.
I played like 4 copies in any deck I could.
Well, okay, I guess I wasn't as big a fan then. However, I do think the card is great. Like much better than a lot of the bounce variants we've seen recently that can hit non-land permanents, not just creatures. This one, it's so flexible, but it's also efficient.
Yeah.
So definitely an important card to be considering. But all I was mentioning is that blink of an eye, Wizard's Retort, seal away, cast down. This is a lot of cheap interaction, and while it may not be as reliable, Wizard's Lightning isn't nothing. This is a very different blend of interaction than we've seen, and I think that it's going to have some effect on the types of cards people play. Like, for instance, if everybody's playing stuff like Seal Away and Cast Down and all that kind of stuff, what does it do for a creature like Tempest Djinn? The blue for a 0/4 flyer that has +1/+0 for each basic island you control.
Actually, Patrick, before we jump to Tempest Djinn, just a look at Danitha, who we talked about earlier this episode already for a second. Danitha has Vigilance, so she's not tapping very often, and she's a legend, right? So if you're
interesting,
thinking about,
I see.
Like, Cast Down doesn't hit Danitha because she's a legend, and Seal Away doesn't hit Danitha because she doesn't tap to attack. Right, so
smart.
Like, this card is it's
that's interesting.
Pretty interesting, right? Like, that's kind of what I was getting at when I was saying, like, even the cards that aren't so obviously great have got layers and layers of kind of cool stuff that's going on with them, and I think that might really encourage Danitha to be played. Maybe even main deck if this is a world of cast downs, right?
I don't think she's much of a sideboard card personally. I think she's more of a main deck card. Either you mean it or you don't.
All right.
Even in small numbers, but yeah.
All right. So Tempest Djinn, creature Djinn, flying, +1
0/4,
+1/+0 for each basic island you control. So if you cast this with 3 islands on turn 3, you've got a 3/4. For 3, which that ain't bad, and
Serendib Efreet without the damage,
and it just gets better.
And that's the floor.
Yeah, I mean, for basic island though, right? So if you're talking about playing specialty lands or some duels or whatever, the card obviously gets a lot worse. But that said, huge incentive to play basic islands if you're going to be all about the Tempest Djinn.
Yeah, and I mean, blue isn't the most trivial cost to begin with.
I mean, unless you're full of basic islands, right?
Exactly. I think this card looks great.
In the abstract, I agree with you. Again, assuming that we're going to have enough basic island action, right? There's no deck in standard right now, for example, that Tempest Djinn would be great in. But you would have to make a new archetype for it.
Okay, let me walk you through a new archetype that I could imagine existing because of Dominaria. Mono blue aggro. So to begin with, I want to take advantage of Silvergill Adept and Wizard's Retort. So going to need some Merfolk and going to need some wizards and mono blue. And for removal, we've actually got 12 removal spells at least. 4 of the repulse, the Merfolk repulse from the previous set, but 4 of the Into the Royal, blink of an eye, and maybe 4 of Merfolk Trickster, which is the blue 2/2 flash. When it enters the battlefield, tap target creature and opponent controls. It loses all abilities until end of turn.
Really solid kind of 2-drop creature for an aggro deck.
Oh yeah. Plus, I think it really just brings the whole room together. It's a Merfolk for your Silvergill Adept. It's a wizard for your Wizard's Retort. It costs the same amount as Wizard's Retort, so you can hold up the trick and obfuscate information. It's a tempo play. It can lock down a blocker. It can, in the middle of combat, remove the ability of a blocking the Scarab God so that it doesn't come back, or Hazaret. It can remove Hazaret's ability. It's so versatile, so flexible, so cheap and efficient, and synergizes with everything. So having Merfolk Trickster and Silvergill Adept, and I'm not imagining it being all Merfolk though. Like, I want to figure out what you need to do in order to be able to get away with Silvergill Adept, because the Adept is just so good. But like the one drops, maybe the Siren Storm Tamer and maybe the unblockable Merfolk. I don't know. Maybe not. Maybe you don't even want the ones. But I could imagine playing maybe even unsummon. I don't know. But like, I could imagine playing a blue aggro deck that has light tribal themes in some spots, but is much more about just being a fast, aggressive deck with powerful cards.
Love this idea. I just want to dwell on the Merfolk Trickster for a second here. The thing about this card, I thought about this card as just like, oh, how do I use this? Either, I'm on curve, I'm just going to play this guy, just get a 2/2 in play on turn 2. I have the versatility because of his flash, right? Like, maybe you can cheat, right? Your opponent's got like 1-drop, they go like a 1/1, and you're like, land go, and they attack you, and you're like, sorry, brah. Like, in block, smash it to death, and, get a freebie like Simeon Grunt style. But it's just a curve card, right? So you just play this as 2/2. I didn't even think about what this does to poor Hazoret or poor the Scarab God, right? Like, you actually just turn on something else, maybe.
And remember, while it taps the creature, that doesn't remove it from combat. So if your opponent just drops a Hazoret and attacks with it, you can wait until they've committed to their attack, then use a Merfolk Trickster from your hand to tap Hazoret, which doesn't do anything, but Hazoret will lose its abilities, and then your Tempest Djinn could just trade with it. No problem.
Sure. Or, I mean, you just have, like, 2 guys and block. Like, it's anything. It's fine.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, maybe your Tempest Djinn's more valuable than the Merfolk Trickster and another creature. I don't know. In my imagination, Hazoret's dead, and I'm already doing backflips, right? So this card is, like, really pretty good, I think, Merfolk Trickster.
Oh, yeah. Well, I think Merfolk Trickster is also going to be an important part of, like, I could imagine Merfolk in Modern and Legacy not Legacy, but Modern, taking advantage of, and it depends, maybe it's just the case that you have too much incentive to play Mutavaults and stuff like that. But, like, I could imagine Wizard's Retort being something that you might be interested in Modern, in your Merfolk deck, because some of the best Merfolk in Modern are also Wizards. In addition to Silvergill Adept, there's stuff like Curse Catcher. If you want Kosi's Trickster, like, the ability to play 4 counter spells, actual counter
target spell.
Like, that's kind of interesting, right?
I think that the phraseology you once used was Silumgar's Scorn is a messed up magic card. I mean, Wizard's Retort is similarly messed up, right? It's actually, its fail state's much better than Silumgar's Scorn's fail state, right? And its good version is exactly as good. Mm-hmm. So it's I think it's probably a pretty great card. Do you think there's going to be many artifacts in this mono blue beatdown deck you're envisioning?
I don't know. I could imagine playing Metallic Mimic, but I could also imagine not. So I think the Djinn takes you a different direction, but I think the card is there's stuff to like about it.
So the reason I ask, I think it's probably pretty obvious, is because of Zahid, Djinn of the Lamp. So This creature is 4 UU for a 5/6 flyer, which is Fat Modi, right? So the card's literally Fat Modi, which was a important card in many different eras of Magic. Obviously, early on, it was one of the premier kind of Shivan Dragon level, top end creatures in the early days. But as late as, like, I'd say maybe 2001's V. Moshowitz was playing Fat Modi in Standard still, right? To help contain people's Blastoderms or that were 5/5, like a 5/6 is an excellent blocker there. But obviously, just Fat Modi would probably not be good enough to play in Standard or any of these modern constructed formats. But it has an additional ability, which was you may pay 3 and a U and tap an untapped artifact you control rather than pay this
just rub it
mana cost. Yeah, like
you can. It is legal to use Aladdin's Lamp in Legacy to play Jinn of the Lamp early. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking, like, whatever it is, like a Renegade map, a treasure. Like, there's that card that's like the repulse that makes a treasure instead of drawing a card. Like, I could just easily see, like, ding your attacker, make a treasure, play my 4th land, untap Jinn of the Lamp. Like, that's kind of an insane 4th turn if you've just tempoed away your opponent's best thing. Like, that, I don't know, that's not nothing. Like,
I got a feeling it's going to end up not really lining up that well in the format. However, it as a starting point, helping set the pace, there's a lot to like about it. It's an attractive design. Like, it's definitely worth, like, a 4-mana 5/6 flyer is like, that's pretty exciting.
Yeah, so I mean,
and if you can tap a treasure, I mean, you are doing it.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, like, what would I want a 5/6 flying on the battlefield? Can I imagine a situation where I want a 5/6 blue flyer?
Yeah, I mean,
obviously, okay. Yes, right? So, if it costs 6, do I want it? Probably not, right? But if it costs 4, no, that seems like pretty good. Tell me more. We're almost in green creature zone right now, and the thing about it is, when you've got it that cheaply, I mean, that's a great racing position, right? Like, you've almost already killed them at the point that you're supposed to be able to cast this card. That's kind of exciting. He flies already.
Somebody's got to be out there dying to people's removal spells that get them to to punish people for their cast downs, right? Like, if you got cast down in your hand and your opponent drops Zaid, like, I don't know, that seems pretty sweet.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I don't know that this is going to be the most successful actual card, but I do like thinking about him.
So a little bit different of a flyer, but so it's 4 black. Urgoros is the empty one is 4 black for a 4/3 flyer. Whenever Urgos, the empty one, deals combat damage to a player, that player discards a card at random. If the player can't, you draw a card. And it is a legendary specter. What do you think?
Not a buyer.
So what is it about cards like this that make them so not even close to close for constructed? But, it's very possible that this is like a solid draft card, depending on what the draft format looks like.
Oh, I mean, I think unless it's like one of these blisteringly fast limited format. I mean, this would be a great sealed deck card, probably, right? Like, whether or not it was outstanding in draft, because it's got evasion, it's got another powerful ability and a half. The problem with this card for constructed is, 4/3 dies to everything, right? Everything is going to kill this guy. Well, not, I guess like a fatal push doesn't kill it, but and not a shock. But most of the other removal that is in even the 2 casting cost range is going to put this thing into the graveyard. That's not a good exchange for a 6 casting cost card. And separately, its ability is just hyper inconsistent. Even if you were getting the Spectre ability off against somebody, 6 turns to get into play means that they're going to have time to set up a defense. It's not like if this card were in play on turn 1, it would be insane, right? It'd be one of the best cards you could play. You'd have a high expectation of getting at least 1 or 2 hits off, even against a deck with ample removal. But if you're giving them 6 turns, right, it's going to get something, right? Something is going to interact with this card. You're going to get blink of an eye with kicker, or one of infinite casting, infinite Counterspells is going to get it. Or like I said before, it's going to eat an Abrade or, anything.
Yeah, and that actually speaks to some of the problem, because it's not just that this card is like... It's not scaled the way that cards like Torrential Gearhulk are at 6, right? Like, the bar is so high for what you can get for 6 mana in Constructed right now. But it's also that it's an inefficient allocation with regards to many of the most popular cards, like Abrade, like Lightning Strike, And the prospect of needing to hit the opponent in order to get the ability to work, that's not as bad in Sealed Deck or Draft. But in Constructed, it's not a given that your 6-drop can just live and then connect with the opponent. Like, it's like, oh, nice life.
Yeah, I mean, just imagine every single playable Planeswalker in Standard is already online at the point that Urgoros, the Empty One, hits play.
Nico Bolas, come on, man. Okay, dude, here's a card aiming more for Constructed. Dauntless Bodyguard. White for a 2/1 human knight. As Dauntless Bodyguard enters the battlefield, choose another creature you control. And you can sacrifice Dauntless Bodyguard to make the chosen creature indestructible until end of turn. So it's white for a 2/1 that can protect one of your other creatures one time if you want.
So this card is obviously sweet. It's non-legendary, so it has neither legendary drawback nor legendary advantage. However, it's just better than a bunch of cards that have seen play and been successful in the past. On the Savannah Alliance kind of... level of playability. In some situations, it's going to give you hyper redundancy on the 1, which is super desirable for, if Tom Ross were still playing, that might be a thing that you might want. And I think that the Bodyguard ability is just gravy. It's fine. Maybe on an Alpha Strike, you get to keep a creature that otherwise would...
See, I really like the Bodyguard ability.
Yeah?
Because if you're okay, so let's say you want to overcommit into Fumigate. Like, yeah. Dauntless, you don't think you...
I think it's great. I mean, it's great. It's upside over an already highly successful model, so I think it's great. I'm just thinking it's like 40% of the time it's your first creature. That's the thing.
Why is it your first creature for 40% of the time?
Because that's your 1, and you want to get a 2 down. That's
okay. So no. So 40. Okay, if you play with 40, if you play a full play set of the Bodyguard, you're going to have it in your opener 40% of the time, right? However, of the times that you have it in your opener, if you have 2 other play sets in your deck, there's of 1s. If you have 2 other 1s that you have 4 copies of, then you're actually going to have another option at 1, something like 75% of the time. So, like, that 40%, you only actually have to lead it and waste the ability. A quarter of that. So you're talking more like only 10% of games are you opening with this being a 2/1 for 1. And it's not like a 2/1 for 1's bad.
No, it's great. It's
right,
great.
But that's you're still only counting opening hands. Over the course of the game, whichever Dauntless Bodyguards you draw, more than 60% of the time, are you going to have are you going to have 1 or more creatures to choose from? I don't know. I guess I just call on the 40% number.
Yeah, the 40% number is probably an exaggeration. The thing is that if you've got multiple Dauntless Bodyguards against a deck with Sweltering Suns or Fumigate, like, that's actually insane, right? Like,
yes.
You can really overcommit, and the opponent can really, it's just nothing he can do. Like, I will trade my Sweltering Sun for your other 1-drop. It's
also just interesting
depressing.
It's also just interesting having a 0-mana sack outlet, right? Like, the prospect of being able to more reliably trigger, like maybe you want to be able to get your extra +1/+1 counters for having a creature leave play. I don't know. Like, there's a lot of different little synergy.
I think the card has a ton of layer to it. I think it's very good. Do you want to talk about these kind of soft Planeswalkers for a sec?
If you want.
Yeah, I mean, they're both the not serious versions, right? These Planeswalkers you see, Teferi and Chandra.
Right.
So, Teferi Timebender is 4 white U for a 5 loyalty Planeswalker, legendary Planeswalker Teferi. Excuse me, legendary Planeswalker Teferi. His abilities are +2 untap, up to 1 target artifact or creature. -3, you gain 2 life and draw 2 cards. -9, take an extra turn after this one. I mean, I kind of like that -3 ability, I have to say. I mean, I don't know if I love it on a 6, but I think that ability is pretty cool. I think that some work can be done on the +2. The -9 seems very soft to me for a limit break ultimate.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. None of these, as always, I think these are just not really priced for constructed. You'd have to really be into the tutor, like this Niambi Faithful Healer.
Yeah.
1 white blue for a 2/2 legendary human cleric that when it enters the battlefield, you can go get Teferi Timebender out of your deck and draw it.
Yeah, I think this is rough. I actually think it's probably worth...
Or your graveyard, yeah.
Talking about Niambi Faithful Healer for a second. And the reason I think it's worth talking about is, like, there are many models of cards that cost 3 mana, whether it's G2, U2, whatever, and are a 2/2 that let you search through your library for something, and those cards are so highly productive and constructed. But here we have Niambi, which is a 2/2 legendary creature for 3, lets you go tutor up a Teferi, which is, a Planeswalker, theoretically one of the more powerful types of cards. And it's not exciting. It's not as exciting as a Trinket Mage or a Treasure Mage or even a Borderland Ranger, I think, on average.
Yeah. That's about it, It is a legend, so there's also always the possibility that maybe somehow, the legend synergies help tip it over. But one of the other features that we haven't really got into yet about legends, one of the soft payoffs, I don't know, historic. So there are some cards that care if you, they trigger every time you play a legend or a saga or an artifact. And the artifact part is really one of these things is not like the other, right? Like, legends don't just come by so fast and cheap. In these sagas, they're not just a dime a dozen. But sometimes you can get a dozen artifacts for a dime, right? Like, if you're just making if you've got treasure map, you might just have a real easy look at a lot of historic triggers, right? Right? Like, for instance, if you've got Jorah, Weatherlight Captain, she's 2 blue-red for a 3/3 legendary human artificer, and whenever you cast a historic spell, draw a card. So if you just have her... She doesn't work with the treasures because it has to actually be cast. But if you have her and you were, say, able to bounce all of your artifacts in your Aetherflux Reservoir deck, right? Like let's say that you bounce all your artifacts and just replay them when you have her in play. That's sort of some redundancy, right?
Yeah, sure.
You could have her and SRAM. And it's worth noting that both her and SRAM are legends. If you play a SRAM when you have her in play, well, you draw a card from that too.
She doesn't draw for herself, right? So it's whenever you cast, right? Not whenever you have one hit. Right.
And so she specifically won't work with treasure, but she's still exciting with being able to play lots of artifacts in one turn potentially, or alternatively, is there any future to this I don't know. Are any of them right? Like the 1 and a white 1/1 flying first strike that gets +1/+1 until end of turn every time you play a historic spell.
The Sarah Disciple.
Yeah.
So 1 and a white for flying first strike. I think this card is a little inconsistent to be. I mean, I don't know. Like maybe not. Maybe in a bigger format. Like if you wouldn't really play this in Affinity, would you? Like a Volt Scourge seems much better than this.
Yeah, and
cost.
First strike is just not going to give you the kind of value that lifelink would.
On a flyer, that's the thing. Like I think
first in this strike, on a 1/1, yeah.
Like first strike just gets way worse if the creature's not on the ground. I think like just nobody fights it, so just like I'm going to hit first. You're not going to hit it all, right? I'll take one. That's the...
So there's also that in terms of equipment, Helm of the Host is kind of interesting. This is some legendary equipment that costs 4. At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a token that's a copy of the equipped creature, except the token isn't legendary if the equipped creature is legendary. That token gains haste.
Wow.
And it has equip cost of 5.
So if you actually get this on to, a creature of significant size, you're doing it, I think. Like what if this is how you get Jinn of the Lamp out?
It's not the most natural curve, though.
No, I guess it's like 4/4 again, 5. Then you get paid off on turn 7 or something. All right, never mind. Terrible.
It's better if you put this on not a legend, right? Because like if you put it on a legend, yeah, your token is not legendary, but the legend that you started with is and dies, right? But now the next time when you move this over to that, then you'll be able to start making copies.
Oh, yeah, my idea gets worse and worse the more you add details.
If you just put this on your creature, whenever you see this sort of kiki-jiki style of thing, there's something to be like keeping an eye on, right?
Well, yeah, like because the creature gains haste, right? Like if you have a tap ability on the creature, for example, that could be, it's just something extra. Like if it can shoot or make a ton of mana, something like that.
It's important to note, though, the token doesn't die. Like you just have the token now.
Yeah. So you just gain tons of material over time.
Yeah. My issue with the card is that it costs 4 + 5 to get going.
Yeah, I think it's like 4 + 5 win the game several turns from now. That's the text. You'll win if you keep playing for several turns. You'll have an overwhelming advantage.
So, yeah, I don't know. Actually, different artifact, though. What do you think of Power Stone Shard? 3 colorless, tap for a colorless for each artifact you control named Power Stone Shard. So by itself, it's just a 3-cost tap for a colorless artifact. Untapped, but just tap for a colorless. And then if you've got 2, well, it's like a cloud posting.
Yeah, I think this card's pretty good. Like just tapping for a colorless for 3 isn't that bad. It comes into play untapped, right? So is it as good as a Mind Stone? No, right? Is it exciting? Kind of. But the fact that it's so good in multiples, like I think maybe it could be played in a control deck. The ability to cast Power Stone Shard on turn 3 and then untap and cast something along the lines of Fumigate, for 5 that's pretty good. I think I might want to do that. And then, you're just building a deck that lives long enough to do multiple exciting things, especially when you could be in a situation where you've got like 3 shards, tap for 9, do something real big.
Now, what about Trophy Mage going to go get Power Stone Shards?
Oh,
kind of nice, right?
Well, that's great. I mean, redundancy.
Exactly.
Redundancy upon redundancy there. And in a situation where having multiple copies of that same card is so valuable, then that's pretty cool.
And then what about Naban, the Dean of Iteration, which is 1 and a blue for a 2/1 legendary creature, human wizard. If a wizard entering the battlefield under your control causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. I'm triggered just reading this.
I mean,
so, dude, 2 mana for a 2/1, we sure aren't paying much, right? And then if you play Naban on turn 2, on turn 3, the Trophy Mage, you get to copy its ability and go get 2 of this Power Stone. Right?
Yeah, that's wild.
And you could also obviously just go get other stuff like, I don't know, Gate to the Afterlife or something.
Yeah, but what if it's not even a Trophy Mage? If you just like have Naban, you can go like Merfolk Trickster or something, tap 2 guys. That's like an insane amount of
Silvergill Adept.
Draw
2 cards.
Yeah.
Or in some scenarios, you could, if you've got the Flying Legend, the Wizard Lord, that Maru Nihu, that when that like 3 for 4 with flash that makes your other wizards +1/+1, and when it enters the battlefield, you can copy one of your spells on the stack, one of your sorcery or instants. So like if you've got Naban in play, even just casting Opt, you can end up you'll get 3 ops when you'll have the opt that you started with, and then when you respond with Maru Nihu with a Naban in play, you make 2 extra copies, and that's just Opt, right?
Yeah, I mean that's.
And we're not even talking Snapcaster Mage in Modern, right? Because I think Naban. No, it sounds funny, but I think Naban. I mean, 2 cost, right? Like it's. So I don't know. I don't know that it's out of the question, particularly since Wizards Retort is so much incentive to play Wizards.
I think that Naban has a crazy Easter egg, which I love about it, which is like the fact that Naban is 2/1, 1 toughness for 2. It's just like an incentive to play lots of copies, because you're like, well, you want to play lots of copies of Naban because you need it on turn 2 so that you can consistently have your Treasure Mage or whatever on turn 3. But you're like, diminishing returns, but like less diminishing when he has 1 toughness. You know what I mean? Like people will kill it. Got to play your next Naban.
Mm-hmm. Dude, if like Naban with Caracas, because like if you want to be bouncing your Snapcaster Mages and Vendilion Click and maybe even Venser anyway, I mean, you can't bounce Snapcaster Mage with Caracas. You could do that one with the Riptide Lab, but maybe you could play Caracas and Riptide Lab. I don't know.
I mean, this is getting pretty fancy, but it actually seems pretty good to me. Like, all these cards they're not Tarmogoyf level of efficiency, but they're fine. You know, they're like,
Snapcaster Mage is pretty close.
I mean, when I say efficiency, I just mean like, you know, casting cost to power ratios, right? So,
sure.
And Snapcaster Mage is like 4 mana basically for a 2 power creature, but I'll live with it for those abilities.
Sure. So this one's kind of a weird build around, but the Flame of Keld, 1 in a red, and it's a Saga. When you first play it, you get to discard your hand. So already you've gotten a 1 with nothing, and this only costs 1 mana more. And then next turn you get to draw 2 cards. And then the turn after, you get, if a red source you control would deal damage to a permanent or player this turn, it deals that much damage plus 2 instead.
And then it goes away?
Yeah.
I have a hard time imagining I want to play this.
You put it down, and you get 1 with nothing right out the gate.
Got it.
The next turn, you get 2 extra cards, like Ancestral Recall, right? And then the next turn, you have a Pyromancer's Swath. right? Like, but it's not just your spells; it's also all your creatures too, right? Like your opponent's dead.
Well, I think
it's effectively +2/+0 to your creatures for the most part, and then your spells, your shock is dealing 4 and your lightning strike is dealing 5. Like, why can't you just kill your opponent with this thing?
I mean, number one, its first ability is discard your hand, right?
That one's not. I think that's the weakest of the 3.
Yes, I agree. So, what if? So this is an enchantment, right? Sagas are enchantments. Like, what if you got this thing blink of an eye, right? That's one thing that.
Oh yeah, it's particularly bad to get it blink of an eye in response to the discard your hand trigger, so that you just don't even have it anymore.
I mean, I'm not sure about that. That's one of the things I thought about. I kind of might want to blink of an eye it after that, so that they cast it again.
Nah,
because it's also then time. But that's one thing. But separately, if you have no hand, right? Regardless of the fact that you're going to draw 3 cards the next turn, right? So you have your card for turn and then 2 additional cards. I mean, that's not a huge guarantee that you can set up, the 3rd chapter of the saga in a meaningful way. So
what are you talking about? All your permanents in play do it.
Like, if you even have good stuff, like, is this the last card? It's like the 10th card you've played in the game. Then, even if it's the 10th card you've played in the game, I'm not even sure that I want to play it. That's what
I don't know. Dude, I don't know. I feel like you could hide your hand somewhere, man. Like, for instance, let's say you're playing Modern and you've got Grape Shot in your deck. Like, you could just play this, right? Like, what if you just played it? And then just trusted the process. See how things are looking 2 turns from now.
I mean, yeah, we can trust the process. I mean, they've got some players there. If the process produces LeBron James next year, I guess we have to trust the process, right? Only 3 years after they fired the GM.
You're not a buyer of the Flame of Keld?
No. This is not. I have a hard time imagining that this card can ever be good enough that an adept deck builder would actually even put in the effort to get it to work.
That's so weird. That's because it doesn't look that different to me than Pyromancer's Swath. I mean, there's lots of differences on a detail level, but it looks like, I mean, people thought Pyromancer's Swath was terrible too. But then, like, a couple of yokels top 4 the World Championships with it a few years back. Okay.
The fundamental difference, because Pyromancer Swath was also played in Blue-Red Storm decks prior to that, right? You had all these abilities to build towards your big turn, your Swath turn, with like either Storm or a mana engine or some sort of progression that was under your control, right? Hideaway, something like that. This, you're literally just like 2 mana, shields down, we got 4 draws to victory, and it just doesn't seem consistent to me.
I'm not saying it's consistent. I'm just saying that I would go to the trouble of building around it, and it seems wild to not, because it's got the potential to kill. I mean, this is like, we'll see. It's probably not very good, but man, it'll have its moments. Speaking of having its moments and having a few more, Goblin Warchief and Siege Gang Commander both back. Now, we already talked about Siege Gang Commander a little bit, but the notion of Goblin Warchief and Siege Gang Commander both being back, plus extra goblins getting made, there's a few things to process with this, right? Like, to figure out.
Well, sure. So Goblin Warchief costs 1 RR, so it costs 3. Siege Gang Commander costs 5, right? 3 RR. But because of Goblin Warchief's cost reduction ability, you can go Goblin Warchief, attack for 2, put them on 18. Next turn, play Siege Gang Commander, because 5 becomes 4, right? And then you can you could be attacking with like all these goblins, right? The Siege Gang Commander itself and the 3 red goblins that it makes. So that's like an additional 3, 4, 5, like it's additional 7 on turn 4. So they're already half their life totals down. And they're basically in a position where if they don't deal with your Siege Gang Commander, they're on a time bomb. It's already there.
So what do you think about the Goblin tribe as a package now, right? Like, Goblin War Chief, obviously, a pretty exciting incentive to play Goblins. And Siege Gang Commander, just a fantastic card in its own right. There are some other Goblins, right? Like, we already had access to Fanatical Firebrand and Rigging Runner, which aren't necessarily the best with Goblin War Chief specifically, but if you've got other Goblin incentives, those are a couple of 1-drops that are not too bad, particularly since they're both also pirates, which makes it so that maybe you can play the Daring Buccaneer, and maybe you can get a little bit of pirate payoff as well. But there's a few other Goblins that that are worth a look, like Goblin Chain Whirler, the red 3/3 first strike. When it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each opponent and each creature and planeswalker they control. We only briefly touched on this one. I mean, 3/3 first strike for 3 is not actually that normal. No, and this just straight up wreaks havoc on these token decks.
I think this card is fantastic.
Same.
Right? So, it's so pushed, right? First of all, it murders tokens. That's one. But in a format that has Goblin War Chief, right? Like, War Chief into Chain Whirler, you can, kill all their tokens if they've got tokens, but he's just 4 expectation against a Planeswalker in play, right? 3 from his attack and then 1 from dinging the Planeswalker.
But also the ability to help finish creatures off, even when your guys don't have haste. If you just attack with some of your creatures, you could always just end combat with a Chain Whirler coming down.
Yeah.
And then your opponent's 2/3 that ate your 2/2, and their 3/3 that ate your 2/2, your other 2/2. Now you're getting the best of both of those trades.
Yeah, the tactics on this card are, we don't talk about tactics that often, but the sequencing, what you want to do when,
this card seems excellent to me.
It's outstanding. It's for a deck that can just, produce 3 red mana, right? Versus one that, might have a forest in play or something. If you can produce 3 red mana on turn 3, turn 4 consistently, I think this is going to be definitely a card that you want to have access to. I think it will, depending on its level of popularity, it could just extinct some decks, right? Look at how well this card lines up against Siege Gang Commander even. Right? If they tap for a Siege Gang Commander without a War Chief, and you're just you just played Chain Whirler, you got them for 2 mana to begin with, right? Now you have a 3/3 first strike versus their 2/2, and they lost all their tokens, right? You're just so far ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, this card's definitely an early one to keep an eye on, an early favorite. What do you think of Squee the Immortal in terms of an additional goblin? He's 1 red for a 2/1 legendary creature goblin. You may cast Squee the Immortal from your graveyard or from exile.
I have a hard time believing that I would want to play Squee the Immortal. Squee Goblin Nabob was so good in his era, right? Which was 2 in a red for a 1/1, but if it whenever it went to the graveyard, it just went back to your hand, right? Every turn. So that card was great with Survival of the Fittest. It was great with Masticore. Players like Atron would play 3-4 copies in their deck just to get so many squeeze for Masticore and just using any of these discard or graveyard synergies over and over again at no cost, right? It was just free, recycle. But Squee the Immortal, I just kind of don't want to pay 3 mana to get a 2/1. I don't care where I'm getting it from. It's just not enough value.
So you don't think this card's going to see you don't think this card's going to actually make a big impact? Maybe even like across format.
I don't think so. I think it could play a role, right? Like this card is actually, if you're a low removal type creature deck, like one of those green-white decks that's done pretty well in Standard recently, you obviously can't get rid of it easily. It is very good against certain types of removal that's exiling things. You could just keep putting it in front of somebody's dinosaur, and they'll just keep trampling it to death and then not killing you. I shouldn't use the word trample there, but so it could be annoying from that standpoint. But 3 casting costs every turn, regardless of where I'm getting it from, to kind of bump. I'm not into it.
Okay, so how about this? Let's suppose that you were taking advantage of this Goblin by playing a Goblin deck, okay?
Yep.
Let's say that your Goblin deck had 4 copies of Goblin Recruiter in it because you're playing Legacy.
Okay.
Now you've got 8 Squees, right? Like you've got all these ways to go get Squee if you wanted, right?
Okay.
Goblin Recruiter has such natural synergy with Food Chain. You see, if you have a Food Chain in play, you can exile one of your creatures to get its cost +1, and you can only use that mana to play more creatures. So, like, if you just have Food Chain and Squee the Immortal, that's infinite.
Oh, you're right.
And if on turn 2 you were to play a Goblin Recruiter, you could on turn 3 play Food Chain, sacrifice your Goblin Recruiter, cast the Squee the Immortal that you went and tutored up, exile it in order to cast the Ringleader, and then because you stacked your whole deck with the Goblin Recruiter, you can play every card in your deck and attack and kill your opponent.
Well, yeah, so can't you just use the Squee the Immortal to just keep casting itself over and over again to make a ton of mana and then storm them?
You can only use the mana from Food Chain to play creatures.
Other creatures, okay.
Right, but like for instance, if you've got Siege Gang Commander anywhere in your deck, right? Like you can just, and that's to say nothing of like Goblin War Chief or any of that stuff, right? Like it's actually very easy to pull off.
But I mean,
I don't think you even need to storm
cast like a Genesis Hydra, right?
I don't think you need any of that. You could if you wanted, but why not just play with Goblin Recruiters and Goblin Ringleaders? Like, why do you need to do any of that stuff? I think you can just play nothing but Biggity Bomb all-star cards and still draw your whole deck. You can play 4 Goblin Matron, 4 Goblin Recruiter, and 4 Squee the Immortal with 4 Goblin Ringleader. Like,
is this the new tech? Is this the hot stuff?
This deck sounds like insane to me. This sounds so busted.
I mean, I almost feel like if you mulligan to Food Chain and 3 lands, you win on turn 3 unopposed every time.
And dude, you can play I don't know that you can't just play 8 Spirit Guides. I don't know that you want to wait until maybe you don't want to do that because it's too because the perfect curve would be like Chrome Mox or something, right? Like if you just play on turn 1, Chrome Mox, Goblin Recruiter, set yourself up, and then turn 2 drop Food Chain and you win. So, maybe the Spirit Guides are the wrong way because...
I think the Spirit Guides and are much better than the Chrome Mox because, in a pinch, let's say you didn't have a 4th land, I'm just making this up, you could just cast the Spirit Guide, make mana and then cast the Recruiter or something, right? But
I'm just saying that it doesn't help you, though, because if you Spirit Guide a Recruiter on turn 2, you still can't win until you play the Food Chain. And if you wait, and if let's say turn 1 you play any 1-drop besides Goblin Lackey, which obviously gets you there, but on turn 2, even if you Spirit Guide down a Food Chain and sack the 1-drop Goblin, you're still behind because even if you play the Recruiter that turn right there, then the creature you need is on top of your deck instead of in your hand. So I don't know. Either way, maybe use both. I don't know. But like this
Patrick, this is just like a brand new idea. You just have to sand off the edges. It seems like a bonkers red deck to me, right? Like food chain on turn 3, you have like this insane engine. Like the cards in your engine just like go get the other aspects of your engine. This sounds unreal to me. But setting aside Legacy, where this card is probably so good that it's going to help contribute to Food Chain or Goblin Recruiter getting banned. Actually, is Goblin Recruiter even legal? I don't know.
Anyway,
it doesn't matter.
Come back to this one.
The Food Chain squeeze structure is, regardless of what the details are.
There's no way that Goblin Recruiter is legal. There's no way. Anyway, I don't know, man. I think this card, it's like, it's suspicious to me, but it looks somewhat abusable. I think playing it fair is like, you have to really be in for the Goblin War Chief making it cheaper because it's just not that efficient. It's possible that the legend aspect is worth enough, but there really aren't all that many goblins. So
you were correct. Goblin Recruiter, while legal in Mirage Block, is banned in Legacy.
Dude, this deck might just be busted in Vintage. Even if you don't play Goblin Recruiter, though, man, if you just have Food Chain with this guy. Like, Squee the Immortal with Food Chain is unreal. And you can still use Goblin Matron, and possibly, even if you want, you can use Imperial Recruiter types. I bet that's still sick. But anyway, no, there's a few other cards that are worth, I guess, worth digging into a little bit more. Specifically, Rat Colony. 1 and a black Rat Colony. It's 2/1 that gets +1/+0 for each other rat you control, and a deck can have any number of rat colonies in it.
I mean, this is definitely going to be a card that folks try to play around. I mean, build around. It's right there for type fun, right? And it's super redundant. I think as long as you've got, I don't know, however, 4 lands, is that you don't want 3 lands probably, right? 2 lands you need. If you have 4 lands, you could just keep pumping out rat colonies, and every one of them is getting bigger and bigger with each one that you play.
Is there any chance that you want to that we can do some kind of shenanigans, like for instance, if surgical extraction was legal, you can extract your own rat colonies so that your deck is deterministic?
I mean, the lands are going to give you some problems, aren't they?
Maybe. I don't know.
I mean, I actually think that the fair version of rat colony is probably worth thinking about. I don't know if it's... I don't know.
How about Lost Legacy? You can Lost Legacy yourself.
Oh, and draw a ton of cards?
Yeah. Like, if you Lost Legacy yourself for rat colonies, like you just say Lost Legacy, you only get to do the ones in your hand, but like you only draw cards for the ones in your hand, but that's actually like... I don't know. That's something. But that helps when you're already exiling all your cards. Being able to hit the ones in your hand and then draw extra cards is like a great way to jumpstart the engine, right? Because your deck is nothing but land in your combo. I guess you need a combo. But I'll leave it up to you.
You don't think there's just like turn 2 rat colony, turn 3 rat colony, attack for each other. So attack for 3, and then like turn 4, 2 rat colonies, attack for like, is it 8? 3, 4, no, it's 10. 10 on turn 4. Right? Like, that seems okay to me.
All right, dude. How about Lost Legacy and name Squee? the Immortal. Ah?
That seems like a lot of work for less card draw than a Glimmer of Genius.
Or just another Squee the Immortal. You can only have one in play anyway. How much are you even doing?
I mean, it's a lot of work for this. I mean, I guess if you just had it anyway, because, you might play against Approach, that's okay. You're like, oh, I have this additional feature of my deck. It's like when people played, snap-based combo decks, and sometimes they played against Reanimator decks that are like, oh, go off. They're like, oh, snap that Acroma. They're like, I am never casting this.
Yeah, let me snap that right off. Keldon Warcaller doesn't seem like so insane of a rate. It does make me sort of question some of the basic assumptions about these sagas. This is 1 in a red for a 2/2 that when it attacks, you put a lore counter on target saga you control. So, for instance, the Flame of Keld that we mentioned earlier, you could drop the Flame of Keld, discard your hand, and then if you attack with the Warcaller, you can actually get that big Storm combo turn a turn earlier.
So we just skip drawing 2 cards.
No, you draw the 2 cards. Right?
No. Right? You put the lore counter on, then... so it has 2 already when you go to your next trigger phase for the Flame of Keld. You just go straight to the 3. Right?
Don't you just get the 2?
I don't think so.
No, you're right. Okay, so then maybe that's not the one to skip.
Maybe that's the only ability on that card I want.
Okay, what about like we mentioned last week, the Antiquities War? Like the first 2 chapters of the saga are look at the top 5 cards of your library, put an artifact in, and the rest on the bottom. But like you can play the Antiquities War and then attack with your Warcaller to move it straight to chapter 2. And then on your next turn, boom, attack for 100. I think the Antiquities War seems dope anyway.
I like this
maybe
card.
Not the Warcaller. Is there a way to do any of this Warcaller stuff without the Warcaller? Like, are there any spells that do that?
I mean, aren't there like cards that put counters on other cards, right? Like Ticking Talk or something.
Yeah. There we go.
I mean, maybe you can do, if you have that, like if you play the Flame of Keld and then it triggers the discard your hand, if you're spawned by adding a counter to it, you just draw 2 cards instead of discarding your hand. Is that how that works? Is it checks on resolution? I honestly don't know.
Who does? Who knows? That's kind of interesting, though. Dude, what is up with Haphazard Bombardment? This is 5 in a red. When Haphazard Bombardment enters the battlefield, and it's an enchantment, when it enters the battlefield, choose 4 non-enchantment permanents you don't control and put an aim counter on each of them. At the beginning of your end step, if 2 or more permanents you don't control have an aim counter on them, destroy one of those permanents at random.
So this card's pretty cool, right? Like, you can put 4 aim counters out, and then it's going to destroy 3 of those 4 permanents over the course of the next 3 turns, right? That's what happens. You just don't know which one lives. You don't know in what order they die. But
right.
If all you're going for is just, Well,
actually, hold on. Keep in mind, though, you can get more, right? Like, if you have 2 Haphazard Bombardments, you actually do get ahead. It's just that there's only one thing that ever doesn't get hit. So, like, if you had 2, you would actually end up hitting 7.
Yeah, I was actually thinking about playing this with Blink of an Eye, right? Like, Wait, I guess if it's not actually in play, then
you're still only destroying one a turn.
Yeah, okay.
But you get to keep going. And the second one is good because it's only ever one permanent that's like off, you know.
This card is actually substantially...
It's land.
Yeah. I think this card is substantially better than it seems at first blush because it will take one of those 4 permanents out the first turn, right? Because your end step is after... In the same turn, your end step is after you've cast it. So, it'll take one of those 4 permanents out, and, again, if you have 2... then you can have 7 aim counters the next turn and destroy two permanents. It's pretty exciting.
Yeah, so I know this is the type of card that you look at, and normally people just glaze over and don't, but there's something here. There's a little bit of potential to this one.
All right, I want to close out on
a
card that might seem boring, but I think is probably going to be pretty good. But I think it's a little boring to look at, and then you're like, oh, it might be pretty good.
This is the note you want to end on? Okay.
Yeah. I don't think it's boring. I think it's good. It just looks boring. Okay. Zalfiran Void, which is a land, uncommon land. When Zalfiran Void enters the battlefield, scry 1, and it has the other ability, tap for colorless. What do you think?
Yeah, it's exactly as good as it looks. So, Banalish Marshal is white for a 3/3. Other creatures you control get +1/+1. No, dude, the Zalfiran Void, I think it's good. They made a bunch. It looks like there's like a cycle of these CCC 3-drops, so there's like a real tension in the mana base stuff. But I think Zalfiran Void it's kind of the Mutavault of Scrylands,
Oh, Banalish Marshal is pretty interesting, actually. So 3/3 for, he's the equivalent of that awesome red card that we were talking about in white. His ability is really powerful, I think. Also, he's a glorious anthem.
Yeah, and a 3/3.
And a 3/3. This card is outstanding.
Yeah, no, this is a great one to protect.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like Goblin King, except for all creatures, and it's bigger.
Yeah, I love it. It's a great card.
But Zalfiran Void, I think, is excellent, and it's extremely constrained in where you can put it, but it will find a number of homes. It's just, very straightforward. Scrying is good. Untapped land is good.
All right. I'm just completely blown away by this set. It's magic.
Well, I mean, Richard Garfield playing an integral role in the design of the set definitely didn't hurt. This is his first set since Innistrad.
Innistrad was also a good set.
Oh yeah. He's made. Yeah, I mean, Richard's. He's made some good ones.
Nice. He made also Alpha.
Yeah, I think that Alpha is probably, in my opinion, the. I mean, it's hard, but I think Alpha is the second best set.
What's the first best set?
Beta.
Oh.
I really think that finishing out those cycles, because I think it's a good move.
I got you. Speaking of finishing out the cycles, peace.
See you next week, man.
Bye-bye.
Life didn't work so great. Tried to play dredge, it's a jailer hate. Ghostly prison waiting for my untapped phase. Your core trapped in amber stasis state. Lost a lot of friends, got